Um, for those of you who are new, we start these sessions out with a definition of bioregionalism because people do have such varying perspectives. They've arrived here and their own unique paths, and it's just such a complex topic. So we're sort of wrestling with our definitions on a weekly basis and being there for one another when we do so, getting inspiration from one another, because being able to explain what bioregionalism is and tell this story to others is such a central part of what we're doing here. So usually I invite people to volunteer their own definition, even if it's evolving and changing over time. Today, I'm just going to read one that's real short and sweet since we have so much that we're doing today. And as a reminder, if you want to share one next week or the week following, just go ahead and reach out to me early and we'll get you into the agenda. So I'm just going to read mine. And that is bioregionalism in practice, in action, brings about greater collective understanding of place, an emerging collective vision for a healthier future, a more connected web of relationships on the ground. And all of these things help communities to become more adaptive. And so I've got that. I'm going to actually post the agenda soon. I don't want to distract too much. I'm kind of reading directly from the agenda for a little while as we get things set. But that definition is in the agenda. And if anybody has any questions or comments or reflections on that, if they want to provide their own in another way, I'll post the reflections from this in the recording in the next couple of days, and please feel free to drop that in the comment section below. So I'm going to just introduce what we're doing today briefly. I intend for the result of what we're doing today, this workshop, to be that we all gain a more nuanced perspective of mapping as a tool for revealing possibilities, like the title of the event says. Also, I want to offer some simple and approachable, yet creative and improvisational homework that we're going to go over in a little while for all of us to engage in with family, with friends on the ground, if you choose to accept the challenge. And so high level, what we're doing today, we're going to start off by setting some framing, and that'll take 5 or 10 minutes just to frame the conversation. We're going to jump into breakout rooms for as much time as we can. I'm hoping 15 or 20 minutes, depending on when I finish this introduction. And then we're going to come back and see what happened in those breakout rooms for a little bit. Following that, we're going to talk about that homework. And then lastly, we're going to wrap up with the time remaining with a little activity, a mapping activity, where we're going to explore Barichara together. The idea there is to see what the homework is going to be, and then we'll kind of jump into a simulation, into a model of how it might go. And so it's going to be an experiment, and yeah, looking forward to that. It'll be interesting. I've never done this before. So this is, yeah, definitely an experiment for me too. And so to start things off, the framing, I want to provide just a super simple definition of a map that I came up with this morning. I think it's really broad. I think the way that I use it is any abstracted representation of reality. And so they can be geographical maps, mind maps. You could brainstorm something on a piece of paper, and that's a kind of map. Bioregional directories, stories I see as kinds of maps of events and of lessons, and even memories. So I see it very broadly. And so I think that's, as we continue to talk about that, I think it's really important for me to point out. And so in order to frame the conversation, I've been doing the last few conversations, I've been starting off with a presentation. But today I asked several members of the Bioregional Catalyst to share some of their thoughts on mapping. And then I wanted to just share some of the things that came out of that, so that it's coming from multiple people. So we have a little bit more of a, I'm trying not to use big multi-aspectual, well-rounded perspective of what this is. So I'm gonna start off with Joe, because this conversation started with Joe Brewer. And he pointed out some important things to keep in mind. And two I'll share. He said that too often maps turn us into hammers and we see the whole world as nails. And then secondly, he said, when we focus on the dialogue and relationships, mapping is de facto, it just happens. And that's kind of the theme of this entire workshop today. In addition, Poyam said something that was very similar. He said that the specific mapping tools are less important than the relationships. Ben K, he talked about how maps can reveal resources. And I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to attend one of his Lifeboat webinars last week, but he's got this awesome process he's developing for on the ground resilience networks. And he says that through that, he's seen that there's real benefit of having people map their assets so that they can see and call out the assets that they already have available to them. So maps can be so useful for uncovering our blind spots and revealing possibilities that we already have available to us. And then Ben Brownell inquired about increasing our skillfulness in using maps. He asked, what do we use maps for or wish we had maps for in regular day-to-day use cases? RJ inquired about how mapping might serve in his real-world context. He talked about over the past 40 years in the Appalachian Edge bioregion, they've had so many people leave or lost so many people, and maintaining continuity of dialogue and purpose has been a challenge. And so he's asked, how can we get a group of people together over the long term, the amount of time that's required for a full bioregional awareness to really emerge, and how might mapping support that process? And then finally, Chad came up with some words of caution. He says, embedding our views in artifacts can solidify opinions and perspectives. Maps can become even more static when shared by a lot of people over long periods of time. Biases become further solidified. And also, this is a really interesting point, reading a map relies on trust of the map maker. And then lastly, before we jump into discussion, I'll just share a little bit of my perspective. I'll add that maps are useful when they are helping groups of people to see and to move in unison. And I also want to emphasize that they are only part of a greater process, one where we're forming a shared dialogue, increasing our relationships, and iteratively using the maps to move forward together. We're here to use maps, not for maps to use us. Unfortunately, I've seen the latter happen over and over. I don't know if it's because of our academic tendencies or what it is, but it's something to definitely be aware of. And with that, hopefully that wasn't too long. Hopefully that's got us kind of thinking in the same or a similar space. I wanted to jump into some discussions in breakout rooms now. And we've got a prompt, and this is a prompt that came from Joe, actually. Prompt for breakout rooms. So, share an experience when a mapping process enabled relationships to emerge that transformed what is possible. And so we're going to go into breakout rooms of 3, I think. There's 17, so there might be a room of 2. I think we're going to go for 20 minutes. Does that sound good to everybody? Everybody want to sit in a room and talk about this for 20 minutes? See where we go? Awesome. And so if there are any other questions or comments before I drop y'all in? No. Okay. All right. Well, I will see you all soon. Hitting the button now. Create rooms. Sweet. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that went well. Hopefully some new ideas were stimulated. I'd love to just hear what people had to say, what things came up. And I think we could talk about this for a good 15 minutes before we jump into a mapping activity. I don't know if anybody's feeling bold, would like to step forward and share something. I'm hearing an oak being cut. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, poem. Oh, you did yourself. Oh, Neil didn't put his hand up. He left. Okay, he was waving goodbye. Well, I can certainly start it off, but I'm going to give you guys just a moment longer for somebody to put their hand up. So I'll go ahead and I'll kick things off. Let's see, what do I want to share my example, or we kind of, our conversation kind of meandered away from the prompt itself and then more into a meta exploration of maps, which got really interesting. I wonder if that happened anywhere else. I think that there's a tendency for that to happen. But I just wanted to say something really briefly, especially because Pamela is so generous, put her hand up. when we talk about how important it is to focus on the process, the wider process of mapping, where we're really considering the dialogue, the broader dialogue that's being formed, that's being created, as well as the relationships, we can see how that allows us to move forward together. That was the thing that we said right at the end of our breakout room. And I think that that's so important, moving together in unison, with an awareness of how the process is impacting, when we're thinking about relationships, people on the ground, because we did talk about how maps can become colonial, right? Look at the colonial, the last 200 years of colonization were facilitated, was enabled by mapping. So if you look at the prompt, you could say, well, colonization was the transformation that was possible. That was brought up in our room, which is so interesting. So how do we recognize, how do we focus on the process in such a way that we don't fall into unhealthy interactions, into creating unhealthy impacts? So we have to see the whole thing. And so with that, I'll stop talking because I've talked a lot. And Pamela and Claire.
I was lucky enough to be with Trisha. I'm not feeling particularly verbal, but she's having lunch, so I'm kind of reporting in. Of course, my introduction to mapping was with Trisha and with Chad and you, Benji, and Paul, when we did the story map for the OSA. And for me, that was revelatory in many ways, partly because I had a narrow definition of mapping, and that blew up entirely. And to be able to see the narrative possibilities of it, and the visual and the interactive and the emergent qualities that came through in that process were quite revelatory. And so I was asking Trisha how she felt about that experience afterwards, and I'm not sure if I can report back. I can't speak for Trisha easily, but she mentioned something about it being, Trish, I know you're there listening, that it was important on a cathartic level, and that it could be something that was useful for more than just her bioregion, that it was something she was able to see how it was applicable across many different different places, different sites. And then we just meandered into a discussion about mapping in general, and how almost that mapping metaphor could be applied to so many things. And it was like a multi-tool that you could just pull out and use whichever, and how tricky that territory could be, because which tool you use in that deck is going to determine what kind of information or what you see. So you have to know in a way what you're looking for, yet what you're looking for is something that's going to be revealed in the process. So there's that whole pretzel thing that goes on there. So we just had a great discussion about mapping, meta mapping, and relationship building through the process of mapping. And I'm going to leave all the juicy details out and go on to Claire.
I'm just wondering if Trisha was wanting to pipe in.
Oh, she asked me to speak because she's having lunch. She's multitasking as well.
Okay. Well, thanks, Pam. So it was mostly Poem and I who were talking. Kieran is, I guess, juggling some other things. Yeah, we started off more on the more actual mapping, and just how that can sort of make things in a more concrete way that can actually be problematic. And so similarly, and then we were talking about relationships of trust and how important those are, and mentioning, I can't remember the name of the woman who J.P. Parker had shared some videos on, but it was on Aboriginal memory boards, and how these boards that basically had sort of these series of beads, and the way that they're put together, and it just looks like a decorative piece, can contain these generations of information that once people are taught how to read them, become these very accurate, sort of millennia old knowledge of the land. But within it are contained the relationships. And so, just anyway, we kind of got onto the dream, the artwork also, the dream, gosh, I'm trying to think, the name escapes me, but Dreamtime, that's often reflected in the artwork, and just how, that relationships are such an important part of what is part of the mapping, and that when we focus on, poem was talking about the Firewise communities and sort of mapping sort of who had different skills, and who, just all of the more noun focused aspects, attributes. And that really, like, there's also things that as you're going into that process, you realize that some people are difficult to deal with, or, well, that's what I was putting onto it, but things about their personalities and how they work together with people are critically important as well, because that evolves over time. So, but that often isn't reflected on those kinds of maps. So anyway, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've said, Poem.
Not really. I mean, just that there are these, we were talking, there are these, like the things of, somebody's is difficult to work with, or there's certain things that may be coming out of the process of doing the mapping that aren't held by the map, but are held by these relationships of trust, right? So the person who tells you that, or maybe tells you that something needs to happen in a certain area, that's not on the map. You've used the map to identify the area, and it's part of this like conversation that's going on in the process. And just wondering about, how that maybe connects back to the Dreamtime drawings, is like, how do we map these things that are hard, that are just hard to see, hard, you may not want to write, oh, this person's really difficult on the map, but there's these things about the landscape, or even the characteristics of a place, that our sense of geographic mapping doesn't we don't have that as part of what we're mapping necessarily. So this place is, I don't know, it feels wholesome or something, right? Like there's a character to the place. How do you map that? It's difficult to map that. Anyway.
Meaty, do you mind if I respond to that really quickly before? Thank you. I just want to say, I think that historically humans have used oral tradition, right, to accomplish what it is you're alluding to. We have stories of places that sort of communicate the complexity, the more of the texture of the place than a geographic map could. And in fact, if we look at some of the most adaptive indigenous cultures, I always think of the Australian Aborigines and the people of the Torres Strait Islands. I've heard that they were able to make so much sense of the world and carry lessons forward in a highly adaptive way, and they didn't even have geographic maps. They had Dreamtime, they had songlines. And so there was no artifact it was all in spoken word. And I think that it's so interesting to look at the power of spoken word as a form of map.
Yeah, that information is held in this, the trust that you have in the conversation with the people, that you're trusting what they're saying to you, and that maybe even Claire was saying that maybe even trust from somebody else that they know that they talk to, that's talking to you. There's like this language of trust, and that's what's holding all that. It's not held in the physical map object.
Yeah. All right, well, I'd love to hear from Meaty, and then really excited to hear from Ben. And I think we'll wrap up this harvest after that, so we can make time for the homework and a little mapping activity. So Meaty and then Ben.
Well, I just want to speak to the comment you made, Benji, because I'm not sure that it's accurate to say, particularly the Australian Aboriginals, who I know from having been taught, them attempting to teach me their art. They had the sand, they had the ground, they had sticks, they had, rock faces. And I don't think it's accurate to say that the story was only carried in words, because I think their vision, what's exciting about the Australian example for me in my lived experience of it, was that there was a way in which the story was held in recognizably agreed symbols that were then used in particular ways to tell stories and to tell the stories on, so that they became living things. And I think that, we can go back many thousands of years, even in Europe with the cave art, to explore what those cave paintings, in a sense, are early maps. But I didn't put my hand up to speak about that. I was really lucky to be in the same room as Ben and Niels. And Ben has been studying mapping processes for years and years. So I was just drinking up some of the things he was sharing. And I think the thing that stays with me most strongly, which links back to your earliest comment, Benji, was the whole thing around colonization, because he was speaking to the fact that in spite of investing many years in mapping processes and collective mapping processes, he hasn't yet seen many, if any, examples where a large community actually has developed and maintained maps as a commons. And he spoke to the fact that you tend to get a user group that's very excited and becomes proficient quite quickly, and that they then become the owners of the mapping process, and their way of viewing reality becomes the way that the mapping process unfolds. So kind of embedded in that is the potential colonization. And I think it's a really important aspect to think about, because it would be so amazing if we could develop for Earth regenerators and bioregional catalysts a living map of the commons as it's evolving and emerging with us. But I'm very excited by all of this, and deep gratitude to Ben for sharing so much, Ben Brownell, for sharing so much of his wisdom. I think he's got a huge amount to offer us.
On to another Ben who probably has a huge amount of, well, no pressure, wisdom to offer us.
Ben Brownell was my introduction to mapping on the Kumu platform, or at least one of the first times that I collaborated on a project to do that and use it. And it did create some value for an initiative we were both a part of at the time, just in kind of painting a picture of things. But I agree that to me, the potential that this technology has is so much greater than what people have managed to actualize for any number of reasons, many of which have been named. I hear what you were just saying, Media. I think that, again, so these things are complex, right? If we treat them, the reductionist view that just says we're going to make a map and the map's going to be really useful gets us into all these traps. But when we start to see the map as part of a larger set of processes, then we can avoid some of those colonizing effects that tend to happen. And we know how to lift up other voices and listen to them and make decisions collectively, even about, what is this map going to show? But it takes time and it takes a commitment to people seeing the value in it. I do think there's sort of an intermediate role that I also haven't seen develop fully, but I think could make a big difference, especially because the technology is still kind of awkward to use, which is, I don't know, I've called the map concierges, or they're kind of the network weaver role. So they're people that are really good at using the maps, and they're using them in service to the larger community and network as really bringing it alive as a commons. And so I think that's a way to deal with this. I raised my hand though to address the trust question, which has come up in other contexts I've been involved with. And how do you map the degree to which there's trust in a community, and obviously you can't just ask people, nor do you really want a map where people are saying you can't trust this person, right? I mean, you could get that data, but I don't think that's going to create the kind of field that we're hoping to cultivate. So one of the things that I've experimented with here and there is mapping gratitude or love, appreciation, as well as actions that happen as a result of engagement. So I do most of my work is around convening, and I've used maps connected to that. And here's a view, if you let me share my screen, Benji, that I could show you from a round of dialogue that I did with actually the social system mapping community practice, which some of you I know are familiar with. And so I facilitated a 6 conversations process, which Trisha also knows about, and Midi and others have participated in. And then we mapped out of that what happened as a result. And can I share now?
Sorry, I made Ben Brownell co-host. Too many Bens. Now you have it. Now you've got permission.
So here's, we didn't get a complete set of data on this, but we got a fair amount. And so what these lines represent are whether new connections were made, that's the teal. If an existing relationship was deepened, that's the purple. And if there was some kind of collaboration being considered, that's the orange. And then solid lines mean that there's some kind of action that actually was planned versus the dashed lines. And you can click on these and see stuff in many cases. Let's see if we can. So here's Keala saying to Christine that he deepened his relationship and he's reaching out to connect again. Sometimes there are actual stories in here. Can't necessarily tell without searching around. Jim might have done one. Yeah, here's this. So this is something he just particularly wrote as a gift he received from Joe. It's Mary saying Joe brings depth and sensitivity, both very important. And so these are like little breadcrumbs you can leave. And it's in a way you can think of it as an asynchronous conversation tool more than a map, right? It's just it's a different form of chat in a way. And it's clunky. You've got to go in here and find yourself and click on yourself and see who's pointing at you, and then click on the lines and see what they said. But there's so much potential, and just seeing the picture to me was very satisfying. You can look at this and you can say, if we assume we collected only an eighth of the data of this kind that existed from what we did, we know a lot happened here. And maybe that's a sign of trust. If a lot of that's going on, if there's a lot of gratitude and collaborating and expressions of appreciation, that's another way to back into the sense that there's a lot of trust going on in that system.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Ben. And it actually goes perfectly with the title of this event, where we're talking about bringing maps to life too. I mean, it makes it a living process. And so I don't think it's nearly as likely to fall into, becoming static. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. And so I'm going to move us along we got about 24 minutes left, and I'm just posting the agenda now. And in that agenda, I've got the homework, if you so choose to participate, with a couple optional prompts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just introduce the homework really briefly, and then we'll jump into a mapping activity and just see what happens. So the homework is just an invitation to everyone to host a mapping activity with a friend or a family member. It could be a potential partner in your landscape. Ben Brownell, I know you're sort of looking out into the Shasta region, or it could be a group of people in your landscape. And the idea is for us to practice focusing on forming that broad bioregional dialogue and the relationships over the particular maps themselves, sort of orient ourselves in such a way to be in right relationship, so to speak, with the maps. And also so we can learn what it feels like to use the maps and mapping activities as scaffolding. And so nobody has to be skilled with maps. I hope that what we do here is sets a really low bar. We just want to, look at some maps together and see what comes up. We might reveal some new ways of seeing, new possibilities, new pathways forward. Questions might be asked that we wouldn't have thought to ask ourselves. And so as far as the activity itself, feel free to follow any inspiration that you might have. This is an opportunity to be improvisational. And what it is specifically is just grabbing any maps, geographical maps. It could be a sketch of something. This is really playful. This is very light. Be willing to scrap the map. We're not creating something that's going to be, a long-lived artifact. This is an opportunity for us to very lightly grab whatever map will help us to explore the particular question or curiosity that comes up in conversation, that comes up in relationship, that we sense might help us to see more, might help us to expand the dialogue more. So it's probably going to be multiple maps. And then once we do all of that, I'm going to create some way for us to share our experiences, whatever it is that we did in the next month or so. And so I hope a few people want to participate. I'm certainly going to do it with some family or some friends. And in case you still don't have any ideas that are coming up, we are going to do the mapping activity here in a moment for about 15 minutes. That might inspire you. But I also provided some prompts in the document in case you want to just have an idea and go with that. And so I once again posted the agenda in the chat. Excited to see where this goes. This is an experiment. I'm really trying to come up with things that we can do, homeworks, if you will. I need a better word for it, but things that we can do in between our events, our gatherings, so that we're really engaging in action in our places, ways that are fun, things that are almost like a game. And so now we'll jump into the mapping activity, get into the practice of it, see if we can't bring a map to life. And so, like I've said, I have no idea how this is going to go, where it's going to go, but we'll just see what happens. And I'm just going to use a few geographical maps to explore Barichara, and then sort of a bioregional project directory. Joe's done a lot of storytelling with all of us around Barichara, so I think this group knows enough to bring the map to life a bit. And if you don't, feel free to ask questions and we'll see where those questions take us. And I've invited Chad to be a co-facilitator, and all that entails, Chad, is if I'm like stalling out, if you see an opportunity to sort of steer the conversation or point something out that I'm doing that's not helpful, please feel free. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. We'll dive into Barichara. Let's see which one. Okay. And so just to demonstrate how simply this can start, I've been curious recently about where Barichara is in relation to the country of Colombia, and in particular, in terms of like the river systems. And I've been really curious about the topography and the different regions. And so what I'm doing now is I just wanted to sort of set some context, orient us in place a little bit. And I found this great map of river systems of Colombia that just really brings them to life. So we have here, I'm guessing you can all see my cursor. This is the Magdalena. I've heard it called the Mississippi of Colombia. I don't know if that's like something that's commonly used or if that was just in a conversation that I was in. But it does drain a lot of the Andes into the Caribbean Sea. And through looking at some other maps, I was able to find out that Barichara is right here. And I'll go to another map to help.
Isn't that
illuminate
Paula's River?
Paulus? Oh, the Magdalena.
Isn't-
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Why not? Paula lives somewhere around here, right? Right on the coastline where the Magdalena empties into the Caribbean. Yeah. And so going back to where Barichara is, if we go up the Magdalena and we take this turn up the Rio Sogamoso, I'm apologize for that pronunciation, and then go up Rio Suarez. This is where Barichara is. And you can see the turn in the Andes that Joe has referred to. That's the turn in the Andes. And just look how flat this plain is down here in comparison to the Andes. So there's definitely two different sides of the country in terms of character. And these bioregions are likely so different. And if we go to the next one, we can see much more clearly with this relief map, the turn in the Andes, just how flat the plain is. And this is, of course, the bioregion that Joe has encircled based on the particular climatology and how cloud systems work in this area. And so from there, hopefully that sort of oriented everybody a little bit, like everyone's just a little bit more familiar with where Barichara is. And maybe that'll, I don't know, give you a little clearer sense of how things are unfolding in the Refi Barichara event that's coming up next week. As we hear what's going on there, at least we'll know where it is. We'll know the rivers that, where the Rio Suarez flows and how it gets down to the Magdalena and out to the Atlantic Ocean. And so that was just a curiosity that I had. And I'm happy to have been able to share that with you all. It was fun to look all that stuff up. But now we're in Barichara and we're looking at a map that Joe and a few other people, I think with Sev and somebody else with Refi Spring created. Here we can see the Rio Suarez flowing north. We can see Barichara and the plateau, and we can see just how different this landscape is. Down here in the canyon that goes down to the river, and then on top of the plateau, we've got a much higher population density. As you can see, there's lots more agriculture, and I'm guessing more landscape degradation. And then we have all of these projects. This reminds me of your bioregional directory poem. We've got all these projects that have been collected together. There was a survey that went out. Joe got a couple people who were volunteered to travel to these projects and actually ask them some questions. And so if we click on one of these projects, we see a description, we see strengths, needs. And so this is actually coming from the projects themselves. This is not Joe writing this information without permission or without representation. So this is a really great map. And you know what, in fact, I'm going to post it right now, the link to it right now in the chat so people can explore, because we don't have time to go into all these projects obviously today. So this is where the experiment happens. I had a curiosity. I pulled out a few maps. I saw some things a little bit more clearly myself. Now I'm sharing it with you all. And we're looking at some projects on the ground, trying to create a broader dialogue of the bioregion that we can all share, that we can continue, because this has already started, to explore together. And we're trying to figure out the ways that we can relate to this place more deeply, or even each other as we explore this. And so with that context set, we've got 5 or 10 to 15 minutes. And I just want to invite other questions, other curiosities, other stories. If anybody has anything that they'd like to add that can help the group to see this more clearly, to just, practice using maps together lightly. And I'll wait a moment. And if anybody wants me to click on anything, something simple, that's fine too. This can be really exploratory. Claire.
Benji, I've just finished this weekend workshop with Mark Lakeman, who, if anyone knows, from the city of Portland, Oregon. And one of the things that just is such a marking of the Roman way of gridding up a city. And I'm looking at that grid
Yeah.
and how, you know, he showed us so many examples of where when villages would arrive, like would grow up out of the landscape, they would have these circular patterns where the roads are, and the village square was usually the sort of part that everything else sort of like a wheel spoked out from. And I don't know where the village square is in that, but it feels to me like if we have to start putting that lens on, so at some point that colonized piece, maybe it would be interesting to find out why it ended up with the grid pattern, but where is the village square and how does it assist in the relation, because it really does change relationships, how the city is where we live is organized. Anyway.
I love that. Yeah, what a great thing to point out. Because when you zoom in, I mean, this could be anywhere, right? This could be in any urban setting, but we zoom out and we are like very remote in Colombia in the Andes. And I do know that Bioparque Mancora, you know, if we click on the description, I guess it doesn't say it in here, but I've heard Joe say that it's sort of a symbol for peace. And it is it's becoming more and more of a central space. Well, central is not the right way to put it because it's at the north side of town, but an important convening space. But to your question, I don't really see anything that's like centrally located where people
There's
who
that
are
park.
just walking
There's that
around.
park right in the center,
Parque
Parque
Principal.
Principal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if Penny or Paula or Chad maybe have some insights about how the gathering, like how the city layout or the town layout.
I also wonder if there's a church often that's in the center.
Yeah, there's a big church right in this town center. And so from what I understand, the Guanay people didn't actually reside here, but they used it as a holy place that they visit on occasion. So the town itself, I believe, was Spanish origin. And I think that the cathedral, like is often the case, is also built on top of a holy place. When you're walking it, it is definitely very much human scale, which is one of the things that I love about the town. And there's such a central vitality around the square there. And I'm also just reflecting on how I saw these maps before being there in person, and then having the personal orientation in space, and then coming back to these maps. So what we bring to the maps is also part of what we also bring ourselves in our terms of understanding, which is sort of interesting experience. Yeah.
Yeah, Paula?
Yeah, about this grid-like structure, it's generally because of how the Spaniards during the colonial times, they just came with these generic maps that they would like put on any territory more or less, where there was a central square with a church, and the mayor or the representatives of the state and the church would have to be the highest building, and the representatives of the state the second highest building, and they would have like this plan. And after that, I don't know exactly, because this was founded in the colonial times, so it might have been because of that.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to note that the grid pattern is Bet's administrative rule, right? So if things are on a grid, then you know who resides where and what packets can be delivered where efficiently, not necessarily as efficient as if you lived there yourself, but from the state's perspective. So like a famous example historically is the reconstruction of Paris. There's the architect Haussmann who came. And, you know, like the Champs Élysées and the avenue leading up to it and all of that is of an administrative sort of top-down orientation that was then imposed in the physical layout of the city, right? And part of the reason also, if the like cities that are convoluted with lots of alleys and not fixed addresses are difficult to rule, so the population can more easily hide and rebel. Right? But if it's on a grid, then you can actually control people more easily and also move military forces through more easily.
That's why historically it's more challenging to control people who live in mountainous regions. Part of the reason. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring out? Any curiosity they want to explore? Anything related to Refi Barichara, which is starting in just 7 days or 5 days? I wonder, does anybody know that the route that they'll be taking, that they'll be walking, maybe that takes us a bit more into the rural areas? Because I know that, let's see, is it the Eye of Water? The Fundación Ojo de Agua. This is a very important regenerative project in the area, right? This is the school and the theater. And that takes us a bit into the country there. Penny, do you know what the walking route will be for Refi Barichara?
There's going to be three different groups all going in different places. I know we just talked about it last night. It's just being developed and it was just changed like yesterday. So I used to know
We're no
it.
longer doing a walking route.
Yeah.
Well, sort of, we're
well-
gonna walk to the Via Parque down in Centro and Verde to Margarita's house. And we're gonna walk up Las Albercas to wherever we want and then be picked up by a bus. But not really walking across the land anymore.
Yeah, so the
Right.
walk part is we were doing more transportation than walking this time, or staying in town for different routes. But
Mhm.
maybe,
Yeah, we have a lot of like people who sit at desks who may not be able to survive walking down steep cliffs. When it rains pretty much every day and the dry season never happened. And we're afraid of them falling and breaking their necks. Or rather, Natalia and Yvonne are. I'm not
Yeah.
particularly worried about it, but they are.
Well, it's very considerate of them.
but they're gonna go to Las Albercas. That'll be one of the groups goes to Las Albercas. And they're gonna go up to the Via Parque and then they're gonna go to a few places in town. And the different groups are going different places based on themes.
Great. Yeah, got it. Thanks for the share. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have Poem. Love to hear from you, and then we'll probably close out.
I'm just curious about the process that was used to collect the information from these pins.
I think it was
Yeah.
volunteers in the community. Penny, do you know more?
Yeah, it was actually one volunteer. The sort of the main community organizers, Natalia and Yvonne, they had a friend who I think she's a student. Is she a student?
She's a graduate student.
A graduate student, and she actually went out and we created a Google form. They created a Google form in Spanish, and then the people answered it. They went out to each project. She went out to each project and interviewed them with the questions, and then it was translated back into English.
And they filled it out there at the interview.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Is that giving you some inspiration for your bioregional
I'm just
director?
curious. I'm just curious about how, because there's so many ways to engage with people and engage this kind of information.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious about what happened, who was it that was having those conversations? Did they know the person beforehand?
Yeah.
All of those things are interesting.
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. Really important details. Definitely. That say a lot about the relationships also. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for participating in that little experiment. It was pretty short, but hope we're seeing that place a little bit more clearly, sensing into a little bit more of a shared dialogue. And I just wanted to really briefly ask if there's any questions about the homework, and we can talk at a later date. People can DM me. Curious how many people want to participate. Yeah, if there's no questions now, I'd love to just go around the room and just do a quick checkout and just share a couple words how you're feeling. Does anybody want to kick that off? I'll kick it off. I'm a little relieved that this is over because I didn't know how this was going to go. And I think it went okay. I don't know. Sweet. I got some thumbs up, and that's very generous, Jan. Thank you very much.
Good.
Claire.
I feel really inspired, and I would love you to feel that this was like a really worthwhile exercise. I will go to Megan.
Yes, I'll say that I'm really curious and also inspired to know more and wanting to know more.
Yeah.
And I'll go to, I guess, Ben Roberts.
I really appreciated the chance to connect with this group and see a lovely mix of familiar faces and new ones, people I hadn't seen in a long time, people I've been hanging out with a fair amount in somewhat recently. I feel like we just sort of scratched the surface of mapping, but it was also, affirming to hear that you're noticing a lot of the same challenges and opportunities and patterns. And I did have an invitation to extend to all of you too, but I'll just put that. I don't know. Maybe this isn't the right time, but
Feel free.
yeah. So some of you may be familiar with the Regenerative Communities Network. Joe Brewer was involved with that in one of its earlier phases. It's now independent of the Capital Institute and kind of rebirthing itself with a summit from October 24th to November 4th on bioregional regeneration. And I'm going to put the link to our save the date flyer in, and mapping is going to be part of what we do and what we talk about, as well as all other things bioregional and regenerative. And would love to have you all participate.
Thank you for the invite, Ben. Yeah. Do you want to pass it along?
We'll pass it to Paula.
What was the checkout question?
Just how you're feeling, Paula.
Okay. Yeah, I'm feeling good. It was a thought-provoking conversation, especially in the breakout room. And I appreciate it. And I'm going to pass it to Nidhi.
Thanks, Paula. I'm even more contemplative than I was before about the challenges we face in terms of really mapping the commons and maintaining maps of the commons. So to the extent that this has stirred all kinds of questions, been very useful. Thank you. And I will pass to, who will I pass to? Jan.
Yes, I think we're in that process of moving from more concrete assumptions that have been placed in our heads about maps to moving towards more of the complexities, the nuances, the more system interrelationship. And that's both a feeling within me of feeling like both stimulated, inspired, and in that kind of disoriented place, but that's what holds possibility. So and that's just great to have done all that in I wouldn't say it's just this hour and a half, because we've all been working on this for a long time in our various ways, but it's just another layer of that. I'm really appreciating that and doing that with others, and appreciate your holding the container and the prompts there, Benji. And I will pass it to Poem.
Thanks. Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Benji, for putting all this together. And I'm feeling a little bit of pressure in the outside world. Got some pending activities coming up. So that's definitely on my mind. Also, looking forward to some of the exercises you laid out, and just got me excited about thinking more and doing more with some of this mapping work. And I will pass it to Chad.
Yeah, there's lots of food for thought here. Thank you for everybody's contributions, and I'm looking forward to what people come up with the homework assignment. Yeah, it should be interesting. And I'll pass it on to Pamela.
Oh, thanks, Chad. Angie, I think this was really inspired. I think you did a terrific job. I really like the way you arced this. So I think your experiment was highly successful. A lot of work that you put into this, and I think that it is really throwing a lot of seeds on the ground, and I think I'm looking forward to the homework. Well, yes, I am. And I'm looking forward to seeing what other people bring in. And I'm going to pass it to Penny, please.
Yeah, I'm feeling good, and I'm thinking I'll probably be doing the homework in Refi Barichara. I'm sure there's going to be lots of mapping, so I don't even have to try. It's just going to be happening. So that'll be fun to see and to report back on. So doing well. And who hasn't gone? Ben Bronwell, have you gone?
Yeah, it's good to get the wheels turning on this stuff again. Hasn't been too central for me, but circling around, thinking about ways to engage with mapping as part of the regioning process and inquiry, exploration. And I guess one final thought here is that's come up is one of the challenges or obstacles to successful mapping processes where you run into these difficulties around landing on consensus understandings and representations and wording, languaging, can be flipped around and looked at in a different light, where mapping becomes more of a tool for personal exploration and feeling into what's becoming. So rather than trying to map what is, like using mapping processes to explore what could be and what's possible. And I think that's where I'm going to be going a little bit more heading into the winter here in a new landscape and region, exploring that possibility space and bringing some creative license to the process to have fun with it too. Let's see.
RJ, Lisa. I think RJ, Lisa. Anybody else haven't gone yet?
Megan, did we hear from you? Oh, all right. RJ, take it away.
Yes, my thought is just good fun. This has been not only productive, it's been very entertaining. And my thought is we know each other, but we already know each other better just through this little exercise that we did today. And I think there's a lot of things that gradually come into better understanding through what we're doing of each other. Much like, well, I won't say much like, yeah, amazingly productive and entertaining, I guess, to say it in formal terms, but a lot more fun than that. Who didn't go?
Just Lisa, right?
Lisa.
I think this has put a project that I'm working on in a really interesting context to not just be locating regenerative projects, but to kind of use mapping as a tool to see what emerges. So I'm excited to see what emerges like for everybody. And yeah, what challenges people might face if they work on the homework, like the nuances of the process that come up. So thanks,
Thank
Benji,
you.
for putting it all in a container, like somebody said.
That's awesome. I'm honored. Yeah, and thanks to everyone for coming by. And we're like 6 minutes over. I really appreciate you hanging around. It's been great to hear closing thoughts. And yeah, onward. And reach out to me if there's any questions about homework or anything in general. Thanks.